What about the issue of so-called Catalonia independence? This has been in the press so much recently on the headlines. What is your views about the interactions between Catalonia, the local, and also the Spanish government?
I think that there has been a lot of unwise policy involved in the recent weeks, because the referendum showed that a rather small number of people came. In other words, Catalonia remains very seriously divided. And the question is whether the will of the people of Catalonia is really in favor of independence. This is not as clear as one would assume, because the people of that region are really divided. But
the parliament voted yes.
The parliament voted yes, sure. But that didn't take care of the problem, because independence has to be supported by a very strong majority of everybody in the country. And that has not been done.
What would this mean? I mean, the Catalonia issue, is it going to set a precedent among many of the other cases, similar cases in different European countries? As you may know, Mr. President,
yes,
the European history is very complicated, just as history anywhere else in the world. So issues like that might pop up from time to time. So what kinds of precedents do you think this will set and should set?
Well, I think that the precedent of this cannot be set, because this is a whole series, there is a whole series of specific circumstances that characterize the development in Catalonia. But there is one fundamental thing which I would really like to emphasize, and that is that in normal circumstances, people will think very seriously before opting for independence as opposed to national unity. In normal circumstances, we would see more like Scotland, where there was a referendum, but on the whole, people realized that it is better to preserve the kind of normalcy they had.
That's right.
There was no police force involved, there was no drama involved of that kind, but the people simply came to a rational conclusion. I think one has to respect the ability of people to come to rational conclusions. One should not try to prevent people from expressing their opinions. That, I think, is fundamental.
But you see, Mr. President, in every European country, it seems these days have their own set of problems, this time only bigger than it used to be. So how do you see these different sets of crises in different capitals that are dragging the European countries away from rallying themselves to come up with some specific solutions to the continent?
Well, I think that European Union will have to sit down and seriously think about its future in the coming period. Now, of course, right now, practically speaking, we are waiting for the German government to be formed. As you know, Germany
the coalition government.
Yes, and the coalition government will have to define its approach. And I hope that approach will follow something that was demonstrated by the new president of France a few weeks ago, when he came with a specific proposal for strengthening of the European Union policies. I believe that that represents about 70% of answers to your question. Not all answers, but 70%.
Yeah.
When it comes to the question of coherence of nation states or states members of the European Union, we need more wisdom than we currently have. And I am not sure how that will go. I think that both values, the will of the people and the integrity of states, have to be preserved.
Well, the European Union could put its strategies together, but the country members or the member countries have also to do their job, because the European Union is not just an entity.
Well, the European Union is a little bit like a human being. It has two legs. One leg is member states, the other leg is European institutions. And like any human being, when one leg suffers, sooner or later the other leg suffers also. So right now we see suffering in the nation states of Europe, in not all, but most. But then the institutions become more limited in their capacity. What we now need is a kind of generation of political will at the European level, through the European institutions, that would define the projection for the future better.
You see also the debate within the European Union about so-called the old Europe and the new Europe. What do you make as Slovenia a so-called one of those from the new Europe.
Yes.
What about the prospect that you are facing right now?
Well, first of all, we in Slovenia don't like this idea of new Europe vis-à-vis old Europe. Now, of course, this division between old and new Europe is artificial, and I think is very disturbing, because that smacks of the old times of Cold War, when we had two types of Europe, and permanent divisions of Europe are always a danger. So we are not happy to see that these divisions are re-emerging again. Where are the solutions? I believe that the European Union will have to redefine its concept of solidarity, and everybody should participate in defining it. Well, you know, initially much of that solidarity was expressed in the so-called common agricultural policy. But we need more than that. We need solidarity which is much deeper and much more comprehensive.
Many of the Central and Eastern European countries are very active on the international stage these days, more and more. For example, some of you have established the so-called 16+1 mechanism,
Yes.
Central and Eastern European countries with China, for example. How would that work, and how is that going to serve your mission for the future vis-à-vis, let's just say, the European Union as a whole?
We see this as a part of a long-term process of transformation. We see China as a partner who will be with us for the rest of history. We don't see China as an accidental visitor. China is with us for the rest of history. So we have to work with China. Secondly, Central and Eastern Europe is a part of Europe which needs more attention in terms of development of infrastructure, foreign investment, technological improvement, use of logistic potential, and everything else.
Yeah.
So we see China as a very natural partner for Central and Eastern Europe in this kind of domains. And we, I must emphasize, we do not see any contradiction between a slightly higher attention that we have in this context of 16+1 vis-à-vis the rest.
The former president of Slovenia, Danilo Turk, is not only a president of his country, but also an expert for long in global governance. Turk served as Slovenia's first ambassador to the UN from the year 1992. Then in 2000, he was appointed by Kofi Annan, then Secretary General of the United Nations, as the Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs. Then he witnessed the ups and downs of the Korean nuclear crisis and the six-party talks. In 2005, Turk returned to Slovenia and became a professor of international law. 2007, he was elected as Slovenia's third president and served a 5-year term. And in the year 2016, he was a contender in the UN Secretary General election. Take a look at what he has to say about some of the other crucial issues around the world. There has been a lot of debate about Northeast Asia security situation.
Yes.
You once served as the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations. You also campaigned as a candidate for the
Yes.
Secretary General. You know very well about that because you were in charge of that issue when you were serving for the UN. But that was during the time of the six-party talks.
Yeah, sure.
It was the sunshine policy.
Sunshine policy.
Yes,
sure.
but now we don't see much sunshine. We
No.
see a lot of crisis.
Yes.
So, Mr. President, what do you think, as a long-time observer of this,
Yes.
participant as well, and also someone from outside those, let's just say, stakeholders,
Yes.
of this process we witnessed over the past 15 years?
Well, this is a very unfortunate turn of events, because you are very right when you reminded me of the good old days of the sunshine policy. Just imagine President Kim Dae-jung visiting President Kim Jong-il, you know, and having discussions. At that time in the United Nations, we were thinking about a kind of a regional system for Northeast Asia security cooperation. It looked very realistic.
You were exactly working on that.
Yes, exactly. We
at the
were
time.
working on that. We saw six-party talks as an embryonic form of a stable Northeast Asian security system. There are two things which I believe are important here. First, I believe that it is essential to establish the right kind of dialogue between North Korea and the United States. We know that that dialogue continues, that it's more or less confidential, but it has to continue, and has to continue with persistence. The second, more long-term vision is still related to this Northeast Asian security system idea. Because at one point, we'll have to come back to six-party talks. I don't think that a permanent solution...
Or multiple-party talks.
Or multiple-party talks, sure. I don't think that a permanent solution of the Korean issue without such a broader framework, multilateral framework, will be possible. We are nowhere near that, of course. We had to delay this project for I don't know how many years. But sooner or later, we'll come back to it.
But you know, Mr. President, people say this is urgent. We have to rush because you got DPRK already developing quite a level of the nuclear power, and the experiments, as you have seen over the past few months, has been really going somewhere. So it is urgent. But on the other hand, we don't have much tools, it seems. So how should we understand this, you know, very apparent crisis that is just looming and coming toward our face?
I don't think that emphasizing the urgency of the problem helps resolving the problem. The problem is, of course, urgent, but we are not helping if the element of urgency is continuously emphasized. I think what we need to emphasize is the qualities that need to be put in place, qualities of dialogue, qualities of reduction of tensions, and specific proposals that go in that direction are vitally important in this context. And you know, I believe that the pressure that has been built so far is already quite high. Let us stop for a moment and think about what other things have to be put into the picture, in addition to pressure, which has put North Korea really in a rather difficult situation.
So many challenges facing our world today. I wouldn't name all of them, but to you, someone who served as the president of a European country, as the Assistant Secretary General of the UN, a candidate for the Secretary General also, what do you consider would be the biggest one for you?
Well, an American politician, a great political leader, Tip O'Neill, once explained that all politics is local. Now, in my opinion, in our world today, all politics has become much too local. It is normal that politics is local because politics has to think about the life of people. But it shouldn't become too local in the sense that people start believing that solutions of their problems are only at home, or that they should take care only of their immediate concerns and forget about the larger picture. Now, we see many manifestations of this problem. I mean, including the rise of far right in Europe, for example, in the region where I come from, where people believe that by closing their societies and returning to the outdated concepts of the past is the way towards future. I think that the politics today has become too local, and it has to open up. And that is, I think, the way forward.
But not many politicians dare to say that, particularly when they're facing elections.
Correct. And this is one of the problems. We have elections very frequently. Sometimes the elections are called on early, so we have early elections. And this has developed a kind of political climate which is not conducive to the solution of the global problems of the world. Luckily, some of the key strategic priorities of the world are sufficiently well understood by everybody, like, for example, climate change. That has now become generally understood, and people would not mind doing more to reduce greenhouse gases or to contribute to policies that are constantly focusing on fighting the climate change.
But you know, this political cycle coincides with your system, which is being preached as democracy. So there are advantages of that, and there are possibly, as you illustrated, disadvantages of that as well. How do you see this balance?
Well, there is a problem today because the electoral cycles make the long-term planning very difficult. Democracies of the Western type do not have the capacity to plan in a very long-term sense. It was interesting to listen to talk of the 19th Congress of CPC, which spoke about democracy. So I think that the democracies will have to be, in a way, revised. They would have to look into the capacity of long-term visions and change things.
Mr. President, before we go, I do have an ultimate question to ask you.
Please.
With your political wisdom and certainly with your rich experiences, both serving your country and on the regional and international stage, what this period of crisis, confusion, conflicts, possible confrontation would mean to us?
You know, in Europe we have commemorated the 100th anniversary of World War I recently, and as you know, there was a lot of discussion of how European powers of that era allowed themselves to sleepwalk into a war. But I think that this kind of sleepwalking is much less likely today, that the world has reached, nevertheless, irrespective of all the complications that we see and all problems that are accompanying us. My hope would be that a grouping like G20 would play a role which would be very stabilizing in the world. Of course, G20 is publicly perceived only because of economics and such things. But the fact that the key players of the world are meeting regularly every year, and they are discussing really very sophisticated matters of global cooperation, that gives me a sense of reassurance. You know, after all, the world has progressed. We are not in a danger of sleepwalking into war. Wars can be prevented, and therefore I believe that the kind of dialogue which we have seen in the G20 context will help.
We hope we will not sleepwalk into any crisis.
Correct.
And by the way, all the mechanisms that you mentioned and the willingness to keep peace will always be with us.
Well, this is not only a hope, this is my belief and expectation.
It must happen. Thank you so much, Mr. President, for being with us. Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.